You then have somebody who is supposed to constantly be watching over you, who is allowed to have sex with you, because that often happens. She mentions it in pieces that people who were other people's direct subordinates. So you needed to meet with them. You needed to do these life counseling things where they would debug you, and you could get fired if you didn't please them, and you would lose a home and a source of income and have a big blank spot on your resume. You think that didn't create an intrinsic pressure to have sex with them?
Well, when you put
Like,
it that way.
the thing that I find interesting about leverage, about the only thing I find interesting, is
Hmm.
the novel business model. It was a
Uh-huh.
very novel business model for a cult, but the novel business model itself was sort of cheesing the Silicon Valley environment of that time period. Everybody has the intentionality of being a good person. How good you intend to be has no correlation with how good you are. How good you are is dependent on your understanding of reality.
Oh, and that's, a really good example of this, because we don't just have to shit all over mysticism.
Would you like to know more?
So, Malcolm, since you were a wee lad, you had always wanted to start a cult and run it. And it's so sad that you have not realized that dream. But you still studied cults a lot. And so I thought we could go over a recent cult that formed and fell apart and theoretically is reformed and is still alive and operational today. And I can get
Um,
your analysis.
yeah, so this is going to be the leverage video. Now, something I should note to our audience about us and leverage is we have a lot of connections to leverage. Like, I know at least a dozen people who were in this cult.
In it,
And
or just involved, or they knew someone?
involved or in it. So yeah, so if you were in the effective altruist community or the less wrong or rationalist community in the Bay Area in the well, the period I was there, God, if I can remember when that was, like early 2000s, I want to say.
We met in 2012. You were there from 2012 to 2015.
No, I was there before we met, Simone, for
Okay, so
years.
you were there. No, you graduated college
Probably like
2010. So theoretically, you were there from 2010
dates don't really
to
matter.
2015. And Leverage during, we'll say Leverage 1.0, which is Leverage and Paradigm, the failed cult that we're going to be talking about, existed from late 2011, early 2012 through 2019. So there was definitely overlap while you were in the Bay Area.
Perfect overlap while I was in the Bay Area. I now a few things that you should note is a big fallout of this is a lot of people in this cult take umbrage with it being called a cult, which is actually now with it publicly being known as a cult,
Well,
which is interesting.
some people openly call it a cult. Most seem to not. Yeah.
Well, no, people who are in it actively. I should note that normatively, like of the time when I was in Silicon Valley, and everyone I know after my time in Silicon Valley, everyone who touched it called it a cult.
While they were involved,
Yeah, that was common to
they're like,
call
"Oh,
it
I'm
a
going to go
cult.
hang out at the cult headquarters."
Yeah, this we're not a cult is some new they like well, at least the younger lower order members knew it was a cult, but like it was
Who joins a cult as a lower order member knowing that it's a cult?
well for the same reason that I'm interested in cults in a way.
Oh, the
They
cult
have this idea
aficionados.
of, well, maybe we can construct a true metaphysical understanding of reality and like a better way of ordering our brains and the way we relate to reality,
Mm,
and through that improve ourselves. Like when I studied cult psychology, the thing that interested me about cult psychology is I was like, these people are able to significantly alter their self identities.
mhm.
Maybe that could be used for benefit. Like if our self identities are that malleable,
Yeah,
then why not build a framework that an individual can just sort of pick up and use to rewrite who they are in the
totally.
same way cults do that to people? And that is what really interested me about the topic. And
Yeah.
I think that they saw the same thing, and there was this sort of cool underground stigma to talking about it that way or thinking about it that way, like, oh yeah, I hang out with this cultist.
Or it's almost
um
like saying that you're in a gang, maybe. It's a little cachet.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I will note that this modern framing of we're not a cult is just out of nowhere and likely due to the negative repercussions they've had of
Mm.
being likened to a cult instead
Wow.
of saying, well, we are a cult, but we're cool. So
That's so interesting because I wasn't one, you were in the Bay Area during early Leverage days. So maybe at the end of Leverage when things started to fall apart after 2015. things were different and they started getting a little more self-conscious. But yeah, I had no idea. That's really fascinating.
So read to me. I've been watching some leverage content recently, so I have some idea. But read to me what.
So to really understand how things went off the rails, which is where I think Malcolm really wants to delve in here, and where I think things get interesting, it's just best to turn to Zoe Kersey's Medium write-up, My Experience with Leverage. I'll give you some highlights just to give you a picture of how this went off the rails and why this was a cult. From Zoe, quote, "People, not everyone, but definitely a lot of us, genuinely thought we were going to take over the US government. One of my supervisors would regularly talk about this as a daunting but inevitable strategic reality. Obviously, we'll do it and succeed, but it seems hard. Another supervisor bemoaned with some performative unease that the necessity of theories about violence and military skill because they just couldn't see any other way we could get to world takeover level. So here's an organization, a cult, it turns out, as you would say, that is keen on taking over the world. That's its plan. Which actually
This is necessarily a red flag. So a lot of people here, people in my organization were talking about eventually taking over the world. Look, the world needs taking over. I've got a plan to take over the world.
So you're flagging this as not bad.
Not bad. No, again, this is one of those categories where, like, fine, you want to take over the world, take over the world. And you do need to, but I would say that the group was stupid. It like actively stupid. The more you'll hear about this group, the more you'll be like, oh wow, there must have been a really large number of stupid people in like the early singularity, EA, and rationalist community. And it's like, there still are, but like astoundingly stupid. Like the idea that you're like, okay, well, we're going to take over the world one day, so let's study military tactics. Like that is not.
That was one person, and this was a minority. I'm just saying, but there were people who had their own opinions in there. And yes, it was a thing. But yeah, so that is one place where it went off the rails, and that is a spicy detail. But I guess you're going to play Liz Lemon in this and be like, is it a deal breaker? And this for you, not a deal breaker. Yeah,
keep going.
World domination. Also, I think it's uniquely ballsy for a cult. Normally, they're just like, we're all going to go to heaven or something. So good for them. Zoe also very conveniently has a numbered list, which is, I think, very EA rationalist community, of a taste of how out of control this got. So I will read to you. To give you a picture of where the culture eventually ended up, here's a list of some of the things I experienced by the end of my time there. 1, 2 to 6 hour long group debugging sessions in which we, as a sub-faction alignment group, would attempt to articulate a demon which had infiltrated our psyches from one of the rival groups, its nature and effects, and get it out of our system using debugging tools. Deal breaker?
Well, no, so this is actually interesting to talk about debugging. So something you'll often have in groups that are attempting to manipulate you psychologically, and it's important to note because, like, okay, if you could actually rework your personality in your brain, which I believe you can, like, would you not want access to those tools? And
Yeah,
would
totally.
you somebody else to make sure you didn't utilize them in a way that was deleterious or caused negative downstream effects?
Sure.
I think the real core is who's setting the goals. So with something like debugging, it is very easy to brainwash someone. If you are in the room with one other person who is asking you about your past and who you are expected to often admit sins to, that's another thing that's really important, especially if you have to look at them in the eyes for long periods of time, this can very easily brainwash people.
Okay.
It was a technique that I looked at, I learned, I was like, where should you notice this? So whenever you're in a group and this is something that's happening, that group has developed, often organically, a form of brainwashing.
Oh, so without intending it, this can all be.
Yeah, sometimes it just happens accidentally. Like you have a group of people who are trying to like talk through things, right? Like trying to work on themselves, like do interpersonal work. And so they get in groups of 2 where they talk through things. And then, accidentally, they decided to do this in a hierarchical way because they wanted people who were more competent to be sort of helping the people who were less competent. And now that hierarchy ends up self-expanding because everyone who's doing it is supposed to recruit more people to do it. And now, you accidentally just evolved a cult. Cults do not need to be started malevolently. Now, in Jeff's case, because I know a lot about leverage, I do believe that he intentionally Googled brainwashing techniques.
Oh, gosh.
Just because they look like they were a collection of obvious brainwashing techniques. But yeah, this is why you see this in leverage right here, which is actually very similar to Thetan readings. What's
Yeah,
being described
debugging
here?
sessions sound like audits from Scientology
Yeah.
or Catholic confessions, I guess.
I'd say they're quite a bit different from Catholic confessions. Actually, I can go into how they're different from Catholic confessions and why Catholic confessions are so uniquely healthy among cultural subgroups.
Oh, yeah, let's compare and contrast.
When you go to a Catholic confession, you are taking the things that you, like the sins you feel you committed, okay? You are volunteering those to a external party who you don't know, so you cannot accidentally become influenced by them as an individual, which is very important. You are unloading them more to like an amorphous entity, the church.
Yeah, no eye
broadly.
contact. You can't see them. You don't theoretically know who they are, but you probably do.
It's pretty hard for an individual priest to use this system to manipulate an individual. So that's one thing that's really important because of how simplistic the interaction is. I give you my sins, you tell me what I need to do to make them not important anymore. Now, psychologically, this has a lot of benefits doing this because now you're taking the things that are psychologically weighing you down and you are giving them to an external entity, but they are not saying those things don't matter or you should learn to not care about the things, which is what modern psychology does, which I actually think it's pretty psychologically unhealthy. Those things do matter, and here is how you play penance for them. And it's some easy physical act, like saying a prayer a number of times or doing prayer beads or something like that.
Yeah.
It's very eloquently and well-designed, psychologically healthy system. Now, psychologically unhealthy systems will often have you in these stories do full personal narratives, often with the goal of discovering quote unquote trauma or where thetans bind it to you. That's what they do in psychology. But
You mean
basically,
Scientology?
Scientology, that's what they're looking for, is some sort of inciting event that they can then say, this is why you have these problems and you need me to deal with this inciting event. They will usually choose something tied to your parents or birth culture as the inciting event because it makes it easier to draw a distance between you and your birth culture.
Right.
So if you see a group that's doing that, what they are trying to do is drive a wedge between you and your support network, while also recontextualizing yourself as needing that group, being dependent on that group. All right, keep going with the list.
Well, you haven't even commented on one of the most interesting elements of this, which I think is the group faction that she alludes to here. Keep in mind that Zoe is talking about how the debugging sessions weren't just this type of audit that you're describing, Scientology style, but this is one in which the alignment group, of which Zoe was a member, was attempting to articulate a demon that had infiltrated their psyches from one of their rival groups. Do you think that these rival groups were intentionally created? I've not heard of them in any cult environment, but I have heard of them in that one psychology study where they took a boys' camp and made them hate each other, and things got so violent they had to stop the study. You recall this, right?
Very interesting. So I know, I think that the rival group thing naturally evolved. And it actually evolved because sort of an inefficiency in the way the organization was created. Side note here, I find it odd that they thought that they could create these ultra cooperative and efficient humans with their techniques, and yet the people acting within their organization were demonstrably less good at cooperating with each other and less efficient than people outside of their organization. Like, to see around you everything collapsing and not realizing that the psychological techniques that you are implementing are markedly worse than even the terrible psychological techniques that pervade our society today. So first we should talk about the demons. So they believed in two types of things at different parts of the story here. One was demons and one was objects.
Yes.
They are both basically like concepts that one person can create and plant in another person's mind.
So it's like memes or ideas or even moods.
Yeah, you and I would contextualize them as like a packaged meme, but they sort of see it more like a bomb or a security camera that somebody placed in their brain that is like watching them and will like give them like vibes of like who planted it there, or that demons I think also can enter from the other world and engage with them. So something that is very important in understanding leverage is he wanted to create an integrated philosophy of everything, right?
Jeff
And
Anders did. Yes.
Jeff Anders did. And the way that he decided to do that was what I would actually call sort of bog standard mysticism. And so what is he combining, which is bog standard mysticism? If people know what I mean, bog standard mysticism is the belief that there's some sort of supernatural, like extra real reality that's beyond our fabric of reality. And that is also God, that extra, that medium, that ultra reality is actually God. And that reality can be engaged with through certain types of corrupted mental states. What those states are depends on which group of mystics you're with. And he came up with honestly pretty bog standard mystical beliefs like demons exist and stuff like that. The core thing that makes leverage different from other groups in the way that it formed and the way that it was structured is that it paid its members to be members. So leverage would pay you to live in a leverage house, and you had to commit to live in a leverage house for a year. And so who's going to do that? First of all, it's people who are already, on the outs with society often. They don't have a family where they're living. They don't have a support
Well, I
network
think
often.
common themes seem to be that these are recent grads who may have had some short-term jobs. Like Zoe, for example, had done some acting, she'd done some admin work, and that was kind of it. So she didn't have a big career already started. No one who did could do something like this easily. That's what you think.
She was a sex slave. No, she was. I can tell from the profile. She was a quote unquote actor who was paid to give acting classes once a week. No, she was being paid around. Keep in mind, these were all like big polyamorous houses. She was being kept for to be used for sex.
We'll have to say legally, this is all very alleged, and
I'm telling you, like
I'm saying from a legal standpoint, Malcolm.
Okay, yes,
this is alleged, and we are not slandering.
Groups are like competent individuals. Like many people in these groups, they would get. So it was hard to get into leverage because it was a closed resource. It was like a cult that paid you to be a member, gave you housing, and gave you access to well-connected, wealthy individuals. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and people going through it, I think, genuinely thought they were saving the world. They didn't think that they were being used for things.
It was a cult playing on the easiest difficulty conceivable. So it did a lot of inefficient things that a normal cult that couldn't afford to pay its members wouldn't have done. Now you're asking, how did a cult get a bunch of money to pay its members to participate? Because they sold itself to wealthy people as a group that was going to do like systemic functional research on this mystical realm. Like mystical perennialism is a fairly common philosophy, even among
what is mystical? Wait, define mystical perennialism. This is new to me.
Perennialism means they believe there is some truth in every religious tradition. Mysticalism is that fabric of reality thing I mentioned before. And so they basically told these wealthy people, we are going to do systemic research on this other side of reality, on like mystical truths. That is not like a terrible idea if you're actually going to do like evidence-based research, but they weren't doing evidence-based research. The real con, and this is interesting because this caused the whole thing for the structure to be inverted if you are contrasting it with a traditional cult.
Okay.
A traditional cult recruits people and takes their money.
Yeah.
The source of income
comes from the recruits, the converts.
Right?
Yeah.
They used converts who they were paying to be converts and paying to house to sell a product up to wealthy people. Part of this product was, the research that they were doing.
Yeah.
But part of this product was also the humans that were being brainwashed.
Yes, and when we should clarify that the mission of obviously the mission of the cult was to save the world, but the general project that they established, at least for Leverage 1.0, Leverage 2.0, who knows, was to create extremely highly effective people who are also cooperative. So apparently it's a misnomer that they're trying to learn how to sort of mint Elon Musk's, because Elon Musk is not very cooperative, but they were trying to basically mint very highly effective people. And there was this premise, at least stated, that it would be possible to take the right type of person. And they apparently vetted people for this before offering them these paid positions and housing, who could through all of this coaching, through these debugging sessions, etc., become these people just to provide
So
context.
the goal, yeah, I'm gonna. So the basically, you can also think of it as a cult startup. It was pitching to these rich people, yes, we're going to do this mystical research, and that was what most of the rich people who funded it were actually interested in, was the mystical research.
Mhm.
They also were pitching it sort of like a startup, like, well, we're going to figure out how to make these ultra effective people who then send money back to the central organization. Like, that was the idea. When they say cooperative, they mean subservient, like that they're going to continue to support this organization and its mission that turned them into these Ubermenches. What their goal was to create spiritual Ubermenches that could outcompete within competitive capitalist economies other individuals, and that was like their game plan. Well, of course, they failed to do that because we can talk about why they failed, which I think is actually a very specific reason why they failed. And they have changed their business plan. With Leverage 2, they've actually moved to a crypto product. And so what they do is this crypto product is they have moved from, because most of the wealthy people that they otherwise could raise money from, like they could with Leverage 1, now know that, one, they are a cult, two, Jeff is just an incompetent buffoon. Like, I'm sorry, like everything I've heard about him, his theories, they are bog standard mystic cult. They are not sophisticated ideas. They are not even sophisticated. It's like a guy picked up a book on brainwashing and then read a few. He is not a bright guy.
Well, he's clearly charismatic enough to get all of these people to sign on, to get all of these people to hold him with a very high level of reference, and to raise enough money to do all of this multiple times.
Isn't hard. If I wanted to start a cult by brainwashing people in the way he started this cult, I could have done that ages ago.
Why didn't you?
Because my goal was always to free people. It was to give
them
right.
Yeah, your whole the thesis was, can you use cult methods on yourself to become a better person, not coerce other people, right?
Not coerce other people to be your servants.
You're ruining our evil reputation. Stop.
I will actually. Well, people could argue, like, remember, like a lot of people know, I slept with over 100 people. I got really, really good at getting people to sleep with me. One of the things I implemented in that process were some of the brainwashing techniques.
Oh, okay. Okay. Bringing it back. Thanks, Malcolm. Bringing it back home.
Bringing it back. It's not that I never utilized these techniques in my life. Yeah. I just had no interest in creating a self-replicating mimetic set. I may have, to some extent, like when I was younger and horny all that, I was not the most ethical person in the world. Like, I could definitely be a better person.
If you're an addict to anything, you will do unethical stuff. And I think most young horny men could be argued to be addicts.
So I look at these sort of sessions that he's talking about, and I did this with girls, very easy. And then you realize, and this happened to me, when you can get sex whenever you want with anyone you want, it gets really boring.
You think that's when he turned to world domination?
No, I don't think he. I think that we'll talk about what he screwed up. It wasn't the world domination that screwed up. It wasn't even the goals that screwed up. It was the touching mysticism that ruined everything.
Back to the themes.
Well, if you look at the things he did, when other people would give an idea, he would always shoot it down and then maybe like give it again, repackaged to the next week or something. Yes. Only ideas that came from Jeff were allowed to be thought of as serious ideas within this group.
According to Zoe. Yes.
According to Zoe, but that's what I've heard as well.
Yeah.
So if this is true, if, Jeff just shoots down ideas all the time and everything like that, that's very easy to do when you adopt a mystical framework. And is one of the core problems with mystical frameworks. If your access to truth is supernatural, i.e. it is achieved through states that only you can achieve, well, this causes a problem. Either you can't communicate with anyone else's source to truth, so there's no cross-interpretability, or one individual has access to a source of truth above all other individual sources of truth. So if Jeff sort of disagrees with your belief about like the way psychology works, the way whatever works, because he has mystical fortification for these beliefs, he's able to just lean on that. And so there can never be any real study or advancement in a meaningful context. That could be the way that you see this as a secular person. And like, people need to understand, my hatred of mysticism is both theological and secular. Completely
and aesthetic.
That's why mysticism is so bad. But from a theological standpoint, I can say Well, okay, so suppose they had good means and they were trying to tap into this mystical realm. Why did it read with like everyone I know who was involved in this was like, this really messed me up? Like,
Mm.
this is not just a her thing. Like everyone I've heard of who's involved with it is like, yeah, this was really
Well, even
messed up.
those who seem to be defending it report having gone through a lot of healing after it and are no contact with most of the people who were involved. So yeah, kind of damning.
Yeah. So no, I don't think you don't just get this here. I actually argue that Stanford has a weird evolved cult in it called Touchy Feely.
It's a
And
class that basically is a cult. You argue.
I started it and I was like, wait, you're trying to brainwash
You started
me.
taking
And
the class. You didn't start the class.
yeah, I started taking the class and I just was like, these are all brainwash techniques from the 80s that you're using right now. And if you talk to people who completed it, they'll be like, it's the best thing ever. It transformed me for life. It blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, because it was a bunch of brainwash techniques from the 80s that like we are taught now in psychology. Make sure you never do this. It can cause dependency.
Yeah, and keep in mind, these are they were uniquely long classes. They typically took place at the end of the day. People would come home crying, that kind of thing. This is not a normal class.
No. They would intentionally sleep deprive you. They were at the end of the day, they were in an incredibly emotionally charged situation where like you really couldn't win. It was stupidly obviously just brainwashing. And I do not know, like I wanted to bring this up, but I knew I couldn't bring this up because so many people have gone through the brainwashing session that if I was like, that's a brainwashing seminar you sent me to, they'd be like, but all of our top staff at Stanford Business School has gone through the brainwashing thing and they love it. They say it's actually become the focus of their entire lives. And I'm like, okay, well, listen, but touchy-feely isn't as bad. It's just brainwashing to indebt you for your entire life to a corporation, the Stanford Business School. But leverage is bad because I actually don't think that the type done within Stanford causes that much damage. The type done within leverage is incredibly damaging because it's mystical brainwashing that levels one person's personal and subjective experience of reality above other people's, which always leads to deleterious outcomes and prevents any real research from taking place. That's why all they have are their quote unquote notes and they've never gotten better at anything.
And it's such a shame too, because that whole apartment building they were living in could have been this incredible psychological research study.
Well, no, but what's really cool, you can still do it, like find all their notes and then do a study on it because it's interesting. But if you look at the theological perspective on the mystic, it's like if their hypothesis was true and you could study the mystical realm and use it to improve people like these would have ended up all successful, or at least some success cases, instead of all severely psychologically damaged. So if I'm outside of my
some have gone on to be successful, I think.
Not wildly, as far as I've heard. I've heard of people like getting out. I don't know anyone who's successful and thinks positively of it.
You're going to take this part that I'm about to say out, right?
That doesn't matter. I said anyone who's successful has a non-positive perception.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying anyone who came out wasn't successful. That's what I heard.
No, okay. Anyone who came out, I should clarify, the successful people who came out of it typically have a negative perception of it. If it was able to work, so then the question is, and they would say it did psychological harm to them. So then the question is, okay, if they're right in these mystical beliefs, if they actually are contacting some sort of, then what they have demonstrated is you should never attempt to do this because you will release real demons.
Well, and actually, funny aside, and I feel like this must be some kind of Bay Area contagion. I feel like my father participated in things almost exactly like this in the 70s and 80s in the Bay Area, like in the same 5-mile vicinity of leverage, because I remember my dad, he went to these psychic workshops, and he went through EST, which is a little cult-like as well. And I remember him telling me at one point when I was a kid, when I was trying to ask him about all this psychic stuff, he's like, yeah, man, we're messing with some pretty dangerous things. You have to keep in mind that when you open your mind to these things, they can get in. And I just took that away to I contextualize that as a kid quite helpfully. This is what happens when you allow yourself to believe something and fear something, that then it actually, you get really afraid of it. But I think these people thought that bringing up demons. And I think having leverage. Why is this always in the Bay Area?
Most long-lived philosophical traditions culturally evolve prohibitions against this form of mysticism. Now, you can say that there is a theological truth for them, or you can say they did this for secular reasons. But it's just, oh, by the way, people might be like, not Jews. I'm like, actually, Yes, Jews. If you look at the
Kabbalah.
sorry, hold on. What's the word I'm looking for? If you look at the word Baal Shem, you get the Baal Shem Tov, the guy who originally started the recent Hasidic sect. Baal Shems used to be thought of as mostly con artists within Jewish communities and were generally looked down upon. That's why he's called like the good Baal Shem. Like so when Kabbalah originally started, it was fighting against an upstream fight, not Kabbalah, but when the Kabbalistically the extremely Kabbalistically influenced sects of Judaism began to gain prevalence, they were fighting against evolved mechanisms that said you should think of these sorts of things as huckstery. They just overcame them. But generally, every group in history is like, yes, if you touch the realms of chaos, your mind gets corrupted, don't do it. And that's a good theological framing for a secular truth, which is when you engage with these sorts of mystical concepts, it always leads to negative externality.
Just doesn't go well. Yeah, just don't do
No,
it.
well, and people will say, when I'll talk to religious people about this, they'll be like, no, it causes fanaticism. It causes a fervent belief. It causes, visions which reaffirm a person's faith. And it's like, yeah, but all those negative things are happening in leverage too. Like all of the good stuff you're getting is getting from the non-mystical side of things. The mystical, like those things, the fanaticism, which is created by whether or not it's this realm of evil, or it's this realm of mental corruption, or it's this just completely, you're allowing some people to say that their subjective experiences of reality trump other people's subjective experiences of reality and everyone should be engaged in their own. It's always going to lead to these negative externalities, which is why I'm so anti-mystic. But something that's interesting here is the framing of this for a lot of people. I think the people who are at the high levels of this, what they see as the collapse reason is that they accidentally unleashed a bunch of demons.
Wait, people actually believe that? They don't just think that people devolved into weird social, what's the word when you have a schizophrenic break? Psychosis?
No. Outsiders who are secularists believe psychosis. And if you look at what they did, it was basically like a house.
But insiders who left don't think it was psychosis?
I'll explain.
Okay,
so basically everyone involved was like a house where almost everyone else, there was a strict hierarchy, and within the hierarchy, people were just constantly watching you, taking notes on you as if you were their test subject. So they had this sense of superiority over everyone else.
Well, in many cases, their financial compensation and role in the house was contingent on them working on you. So yes, they kind of had to do it.
Yes. But keep in mind this cycle. If you know that like everyone you're interacting with is like writing about you at the end of the day, like, oh, here's this, and trying to understand you and your motivations. If you can't see how that would be psychologically harmful in mass, like you just don't understand human psychology. Like, of course that's going to lead to negative externalities. Of course it's going to lead to everyone attempting to sort of overanalyze everything they're doing in the moment, having this sort of panicky self-reflection and existential dread, and it will cause the creation of little cabals that are going to fight against each other because
hence these groups. Yeah,
because you need teammates to sort of protect you and everything like that in this incredibly hostile environment where everyone is constantly psychoanalyzing you but is untrained to do so.
Well, so then I can give you a quote from A Taste of How Out of Control This Got, which is number 2, which is related to this, just to give an example to people from a firsthand account. Quote, people in my group commenting on a rival group having done magic that weekend and clearly having powered up and saying we needed to now go debug the effects of being around that powered up group, which they said was attacking them or otherwise affecting their ability to trust their own perceptions. Number 3, related as well, accusations being thrown around about people leaving objects similar to demons in other people and people trying to sort out where the bad object originated and if it had been left intentionally or malevolently or by act/subconsciously.
So as a secularist, when you put on a secular hat and you're approaching any of this, it's very obvious that this would lead to psychological breaks.
Yeah.
Like this is obviously a psychologically unhealthy environment. However, these people are not secularists. When you have entered this community, you have accepted that there is some other like supernatural realm that you are studying.
Yeah, well, she gave a definition of objects. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, go for it.
Objects were something that became a topic of study at Leverage, about which Jeff gave presentations. Aside from Simone, do you think Jeff intentionally created the concept of objects, or this was just something that he...
No, it's a stupid, obvious concept. It's
Okay.
like Jeff is just not that bright. I'm sorry, but anyway, continue.
They were considered to be sort of like autonomous psychological bits that you could accidentally or purposefully leave in another person's mind to affect or control them. If intentional, it might cause them to subtly view you a different way, make more real or less real certain concepts, change their experience of the passage of time, say, or make them more susceptible to mind reading attempts in the future, etc.
This is just meant to stoke paranoia. Like, I don't think that he may have been trying to stoke paranoia, but it's also just not a particularly novel or complicated concept. He's describing like a self-replicating mimetic package, like a meme bomb, basically. But that's not
To
the
your
way he
point of
sees it.
yeah,
He sees it as mystical.
to your point of things going off the rails because they went mystical, I think it's also helpful to give these additional examples she presented as an example of just how mystical they got. Because some of this could
Yeah.
probably be construed as, oh, they're doing this weird psychological research. They're just trying to use weird words to explain a phenomenon that they're trying to coin as psychological researchers, and they'll publish it. But here she says, number 4, people doing seances seriously. I was under the impression the purpose was to call on demonic energies and use their power to affect the practitioner's social standing. So seances. She also has number 5, former rationalists clearing their homes of bad energy using crystals. And this is where I think your point about mysticism is really strong, Malcolm, extra strong, because rationalists were, there was like a different Bay Area cult, but the standard of that religion was just how much based on scientific research your life was being lived to a great extent. You know, just how completely reasoned and
Mhm.
non-mystical you were. And the fact that someone could go from being a rationalist to using crystals to clear their homes of bad energy. That's wild.
Well, I mean, but that can happen when you engage with the mystical. You allow for forms of truth to come from things other than objective evidence and objective reality. And so you're like, wait, really? People who were in this, even afterwards, still believe that they were just attacked by demons? Like, of course they do. As soon as you open yourself to these sorts of explanations, and you're trying to explain why these bad things happen to you when you were engaging in these environments, you're going to come up with mystical explanations for it. And that's what they did. They thought they were attacked by demons that they had accidentally summoned.
Well, yeah. And what's so notable too is that this was so damaging to the members of the group. So to provide her number 6, 7, and 8 on this list, which give, I think, good illustrations of how people came away damaged to your earlier point and prove your earlier point. Number 6, much talk and theorizing on the subject of intention reading, which was something like mind reading. Jeff gave multiple presentations on this, which of course, like you said, would have people acting weird and feeling paranoid. 7, I personally went through many months of near constant terror at being mentally invaded. My only source of help for this became the leaders of my own subgroup, who unfortunately were also completely caught up in the mania and had their own goals and desires for me that were mostly definitely not in my interest. 8, I personally prayed for hours most nights for months to rid myself of specific demons I felt I'd picked up from other members of Leverage. If this sounds insane, it's because it was. It was a crazy experience, unlike any I've ever had. And there are many more weird anecdotes where that came from. Again, it's a really good read. You should read it, the whole thing. But yeah, that I think, yeah, this hammers home your entire point that it was the mysticism that brought them off the rails.
This is why you don't engage with mysticism. You could have done something like this that could have been quite interesting without the mysticism.
Well, and to that point, I'd love for you to open up one of their very, very early plans. It's a flow chart.
I'll open it up here.
Because I think this can show how such a well-intentioned and wide-spanning project that I'm sure this was pitched to some of the people who donated initial funds to Leverage 1.0 got really excited about. And the plan, Malcolm, you'll probably include some of this on the screen. The goal was global well-being. So yeah, they probably really did intend to take over the government, because you kind of can't do all of the things that they wanted to which included, they were going to really solve everything. Education, ensure universal access to excellent educational resources. They were also going to cure disease and ensure universal access to recreational and artistic opportunities. They were going to provide basically universal basic income and access to social goods. And they were going to eliminate all harmful governments somehow, which is probably where their whole "we have to take over the government" thing came over, and reduce risk of global catastrophic events, which also would probably need to involve governmental control, while also minimizing harmful norms. That is to say, quote, have everyone choose to remove all harmful social rules that can be removed, unquote, which is also very coercive and creepy per our standards. But still, like, these people basically just wanted to fix the world and make heaven on earth, right? Like, that was it.
Yeah, no, it's very clear. Their plan is eventually. I mean, they were trying to create a mimetic structure very similar to what I'm trying to do in a way that could eventually become the dominant mimetic structure on Earth. When instead, what I'm trying to do is create a mimetic structure that can become reach a stable optimum with other mimetic structures that allow people different from them to exist.
Yeah.
Which is quite different from their goal in that respect. So it's not true world domination. And the core difference is they engage with mysticism. They engage with saying, we're going to do all this, but we don't need to have the secular backing. Like, whenever I give a theological position, I always say, and here's the secular reason you would take the same position. They didn't need to do that. They
didn't. And when you look at this flowchart, there's nothing, at least I haven't looked at every single box on it, but there's nothing to me that reads mysticism in the beginning. In fact, what it seems to more or less be is, we're going to make the world perfect by our standards, at least. And we're going to do so by creating incredibly effective people and have those people create nonprofits and businesses that get more resources and get more control until eventually we run absolutely everything and have infinite resources and can solve all the problems. That was it. And of course, they started with trying to create the world's most effective people because they felt like that was the most limited resource. You couldn't start an amazing nonprofit. You couldn't start an amazing business and solve market problems and find arbitrage opportunities if you didn't have these high agency cooperative people. And it seems to...
I disagree with you on that's why they started with that.
Really? Okay, why do you think
they saw them as a revenue source? That was the core reason they wanted to create effective people.
Well, that's part of it, yeah, is that they would generate the nonprofits and the companies that created revenue, but those were also supposed to be the nonprofits and the companies that did the research that cured disease and created amazing education.
Yeah, no, it was a plan for creating power based on the hypothesis that if they expose people to the mystical realm, it improves them instead of destroys them. And what we saw is the hypothesis, the opposite turned out to be true. When you engage with the mystical realm for both secular and theological reasons, it destroys your soul, or whatever you want to say, or your brain, or your ability to think rationally. And so now we need to look at what they've become with Leverage 2.0. So Leverage 2.0, because now most competent rich people who are in any way connected to the Silicon Valley ecosystem, they know that this doesn't work. At the very least, they know that whatever Jeff did last time summoned a bunch of demons, even if they believe that everything else happened, and they're just not going to work with him again. So now he needs to find another way to get money to fund this. Now, he is not quite smart enough to start a real cult. To start a real cult, he'd have to start a group that, funded from its members. Like the people who were going through it were both competent and believed in enough to fund it, which is a hard thing to do. One way you could do that is to exhaust your members' wealth, like get them to give everything to you when they join the cult. But then you need to constantly recruit new members to keep things basically running, and that's stupid. Like, if you're going to create a really effective cult, you need the people to be able to earn money while still paying it. Now, what he's doing now is a crypto iteration, where he is trying to build the cult into the product, still pay people to be a member, and then fundraise through making the product exclusive and cool enough that people want to engage with it, through this belief that they're going to have a lot of access and everything like that in the future, which is doable when you're dealing with, bog standard mystics. I think when people begin to see mysticism, like Leverage and stuff like that, coming from an external force, they can begin to see why I have so much when I see it within their own world, right? Like, they see me walk up and encounter mysticism and And they don't get why I'm doing that, because they're like, but this has been here for a couple hundred years at this point, this has always been part of this tradition. And I'm like, no, it just came a couple hundred years ago. What are you doing? That's the dangerous bomb you're wielding. And with leverage, it's the same, right? Or not with leverage, it's the same. With leverage, it's a good external way to see how mysticism can destroy otherwise well-intentioned individuals. The problem is that if you remove mysticism from what they were doing, then what he was doing was just psychology and education, which is sort of like what we're doing, right? If you look at the Collins Institute, it's like, how can we at scale create more effective people? But we are doing it with a completely different framework than him, which is saying, but what if we can do it in a pluralistic way where they're able to maintain their birth culture? So instead of doing what he did, where like you go into his educational system, you go into his psychological framing, and you need to adopt everything he subjectively believes about reality, you need to presume is true.
Yeah, everything he did seemed to be very unifying and unified.
Whereas, and this is the problem with mysticism, it leads in that direction, right? Like, well, if this is ultimate truth, then everyone has to believe it. Whereas we take the exact opposite approach, right? We're like, well, truth emerges from different ideas competing in an ecosystem. And so that causes us to say, well, we'll create an education system. We'll eventually take over the world with the Collins Institute. It's called the Institute at that point. You got leverage versus the Institute. But we will be able to be efficacious in the way that we lay this out. I think we make our fans' lives better because we basically lay everything out for them. Like when he would do something like do all the things and that could potentially brainwash. Whenever I suggest like brainwashing techniques, I'm like, this is a brainwashing technique. Here's how you might be able to use it to benefit yourself, but be careful. But yeah, to the mystical thing, I think through leverage, somebody can see why they may have blind spots in things that are just like culturally and ancestrally close to them, and not understand why we view them with such antagonism and fear and genuine fear. Like I view mystical engagement as really dangerous. And I don't think that everyone who engages with it is like permanently damaged, but I think that when you like as a community begin to engage with it like this, and certain individuals can, like Jeff, can then utilize this to brain hack people pretty quickly. And then there was the pushback, which was like, this isn't a cult. It's here's all the cult things we do.
Why do you think they started trying to distance themselves so vehemently from the cult branding, if you indeed are correct about them being so open about it in early leverage?
Yeah, now keep in mind, a lot of groups, you go to early singularitarians, they're like, we're a cult. You go to early, they may have meant it kind of jokingly, but with leverage, it was taken differently because like they obviously were a cult. And keep in mind, everyone has to live in the house. They're all or a lot of them are polyamorous, and they're being paid by the house, and you could be fired if you don't please your superiors. Like you don't see how this would basically lead to a garden of sex slaves. There's really nothing else that could come out of this. That was always the end state. As soon as you structured things this way. Well, I mean, no, just think. I'm not saying like everyone in leverage is a perfect saint, okay? You then have somebody who is supposed to constantly be watching over you, who is allowed to have sex with you, because that often happens. She mentions it in pieces that people who were other people's direct subordinates. So you needed to meet with them. You needed to do these life counseling things where they would debug you, and you could get fired if you didn't please them, and you would lose a home and a source of income and have a big blank spot on your resume. You think that didn't create an intrinsic pressure to have sex with them?
Well, when you put it that way.
And then the house is run by this stud, right? Who's like, well, I am the number one, enlightened guy of all enlightened guys, and I have access to truth, and I can basically kick anyone out who disagrees with me in any meaningful way. The thing that I find interesting about leverage, about the only thing I find interesting, is the novel business model. It's a very novel business model for a cult, but the novel business model itself was sort of cheesing the Silicon Valley environment of that time period to hustle ultra wealthy people. Not, it's that impressive to me that somebody was able to hustle ultra wealthy people with bog standard mysticism. Like, no. No, not really. Are ideas like objects sophisticated ideas? No. Do they give you a better understanding of reality? No. Like nothing that came out of leverage was sophisticated or like even from a completely malevolent perspective other than his marketing and sales skills. But that was mostly cheesed by the environment he was in and all the dumb EA people. And this is the other thing about like the EA community. The EA community and rationalists and singularitarians, they like think of themselves as smart, but they get brain hacked way too easily. They're like one of the easiest communities to brain hack. And this is what I see with the AI apocalypticism movement. Actually, recently I've been trying to understand that movement better, and we'll do a different episode about it. But one thing I've noticed is I started to be like, there's these people who I respect and see as smart, and they believe this person who is obviously a charlatan and does not think using logical structures. And so then I dug into it and I was like, oh, everyone who I respect who believes him is autistic and he's just hacking their autism.
Oh
Um,
dear. I don't
and I,
think that Zoe comes across as
no.
autistic.
I don't think that this was totally that, but it was like, I'm a well-meaning person who wants to make the world a better place. Okay, come into this system. And then they begin to define truth differently than the way a person who is steeled in the monotheistic traditions would, which is it's about rules and laws and predictability and using faith and your ability to understand reality to better predict future states of reality. They just throw all that out. They say truth comes from your subjective experience, and now when our subjective experiences clash, truth comes from the hierarchy, where the subjective experience of the person at the top of the hierarchy matters more than the subjective experience at the bottom of the hierarchy. And that's really what I mean when I say mysticism. So when people are like, what do you really mean when you say mysticism? I mean all truth and all philosophical systems where an individual's subjective experience of reality has more truth than their objective engagement with that reality.
Interesting. I think one of the final things that you often say about people going off the rails is that when people believe that they're good and they're right, that they're far more likely to end up doing very evil things. So I don't necessarily think that Jeff or other leaders in this organization meant to do harm or to act selfishly. In fact, a really common theme among everyone writing about their experiences is that they legit thought they were going to save the world. They were going to go down in history books. They were doing such important work. And it was really scary to them, this concept that they could be kicked out, because then it's like you could have mattered so much, right? And what makes me think that that kind of mindset really pervaded this is the fact that in her account on In Defense of Attempting Hard Things, Kathleen writes about her current state, her current life. Quote, "It's painful for me to share all of this, and it's also inconvenient. I have important work to do on my current project that a lot of people are counting on me to do carefully and quickly, which is already pretty overwhelming for me in my current state, and which unfortunately can't be paused while I figure out what might make sense to say publicly that will steer people toward what seem to be more accurate beliefs." And you can just see this sense of urgency and importance in everything that she's writing, that she thinks that she's doing something urgent and essential. And it's weird reading it because I read it and I think, oh, you're in leverage right now, right? But no, she's not. She's no contact with leverage people. She's doing her own next thing now, but she still maintains this mindset of, well, that almost seems like someone who's like on 24, who's like, they have to save the world. The world's about to blow up and it only depends on me and everyone's counting on me.
You're believing her that she's no contact with leverage. She might still keep in mind, if she's defending them. This is why I don't believe that. I don't know anyone who contacted leverage that defends leverage. Everyone I know who was involved with leverage said either one of two things. Either it was a deleterious cult or it was all real, but they let demons into the world. Those are the only two opinions I have ever heard.
Oh, no.
I have never heard anyone be like, oh, yeah, it was a good project, just a little wrong-headed in a few areas.
But this is a sentiment that I see pervades rationalism, effective altruism, AI apocalypticism, that I am right, I am fighting for good. Anyone who thinks that I'm, doing the wrong thing or whatever is wrong, misguided, evil, ignorant, etc., and that there's a lot less internal criticism, even though everything about leverage was about questioning yourself and breaking yourself down to build a better self, which is really interesting to me. And I just feel like that perception that you're fighting on the side of good and that you're doing good can be really dangerous. Or even if you just think that you're out to do good, because Zoe in her account keeps talking about these instances in which people kind of accused her of placing bad objects in them, and she was seen with a lot of suspicion after a period of time. And one of the reasons her experiences were so bad was that the community really started to demonize her and throw her to the bottom of the social hierarchy and accuse her of all sorts of things. And she genuinely believed it because she was in this terrible position. And she was like, oh God, what have I done wrong? I can't believe this. But I think even she thought that she was a good person, and that may have just led her to be victimized more. I don't know, but I just feel like that's another theme going on here.
And this is the problem. It's people fighting to be good people that creates most of society's problems. You should be a great person. And a great person is often a bad person. A great person doesn't care about what is good and bad. They care about what must be done. For what must come to pass. Alexander the Great, Catherine the Great, these were not good.
Or even Ivan the Terrible.
Oh. But that'd be fun. One day I become the type of Malcolm the Great. But no, you want to be a great person, that requires, and this is like, I understand what you're saying, but you can develop this sort of mindset around anything. You can develop it around climate change. You can develop it around, the question is are you basing your beliefs about the world? And this is the problem. It's too many people decide how good they are of a person based on their intentionality. Everybody has the intentionality of being a good person. How good you intend to be has no correlation with how good you are. How good you are is dependent on your understanding of reality.
Oh, and that's, a really good example of this, because we don't just have to shit all over mysticism. We can also shit all over antinatalism. Is the Sandy Hook shooter. He thought that he was doing a favor to all of these young children who were tragically shot because life is suffering and it's terrible that their parents brought them into the world. And it would be terrible if they lived full lives and were exposed to all the horrors of being alive. And he thought he was doing good, right? Hitler thought he was doing good too. I don't know if Genghis Khan thought he was doing good, though. I don't know about that.
This is why it's so important when people are like, why do you care about all this philosophy stuff? Why do you care about like the nature of good and evil, the true nature of reality, etc.? That needs to be like your top question. Because how good of a person, how good your life ends up not being determined by how good you tried to be. It ends up being determined by your understanding of reality. I was just on a show. And somebody was like, and we'll do a longer episode about this, but he asked me, well, there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for love in your system. And I said, yeah, there isn't. Because love isn't a compass that points to good. Love often points to evil. And if you're using the wrong thing as a compass, no matter how hard you follow it, you could be the most evil person ever. People who live for love often end up living lives of evil, okay? Because they misunderstand reality. They misunderstand the consequences of the things that they're doing. And that's why this is so critical. And it's so critical with these people, whereas they thought they were good people because they were trying to be good people extra hard, without understanding everyone does that. You need to understand, and when I say understand reality, I mean understand society, understand the way other people think, understand philosophy, all the things we talk about on this show. That is understanding reality. If your understanding there is wrong, then you end up evil. Every time.
Depressing.
Anyway.
But still fascinating, and a dumpster fire that I wish I was able to watch more closely. Probably not, though, actually. It seems to involve a lot of socializing.
And this comes to why the mysticism thing is so important to us. Because if we have this framing, if you are getting an understanding of reality from a non-confirmable space, from a space outside of rules and reason and logic,
then there's no way you'll know when you teeter into the world of evil.
Exactly. So you always do. Anyway, love you.
I love you too. What would you like